my Apple device. So how about if I call the work session of the town of Alta Town Council to order of May 6, 2020. This is a remote work session to be followed by a remote town council meeting immediately following. Okay, the first item on our agenda for this meeting is to hear from our local medical colleagues, Dr. Ken Lbre and Carolyn Anstel. I don't know if Carolyn's on the call, but
I just admitted her.
Okay,
just came out of the shower. Hi, Carolyn.
And I see now that Margaret is with us too, so that's good.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, Chris, you sent us a memo. Would you like to start off this conversation?
Sure thing. Good afternoon. Yeah, so consistent with our previous couple council meetings where we discussed the COVID-19 pandemic and what we're up to in Alta related to that. I prepared this memo. It has some numbers that are obviously out of date. Those were current middle of last week. As of last night, of course, these numbers are now obsolete, and there are some publicly available numbers for case rates in Utah. But as of last night, we had 5,449 cases in the state of Utah, 2,832 in Salt Lake County. We had 94 hospitalizations in the state and 53 in Salt Lake County. We had 56 fatalities and 35 in Salt Lake County as of last night. 126,715 tests administered in the state of Utah. Again, 5,449% positive for a 4.3% positive rate. So those are numbers that are that were relevant last night, and of course they've changed a little bit today. The rest of this memo defines the status of our emergency orders and kind of community operations, town of Alta operations at present, or as of last week, and much of this, if not all of it, is still current. The town remains in the state we've been in for the last couple months. Administrative staff are working from home. Certain sanitary measures and social distancing measures remain in place at town of Alta facilities, including the post office, Alta Central, in the town. The community center's closed. Only one of us is going to work in the town office at a time. That remains the case. We haven't begun the conversation about whether, when, or how to change that, to start to share the office space. And so we're kind of in a holding pattern. Of course, community-wide, we're in the shoulder season now. So a lot of business operations would typically be in the state they're in now in early May anyways. So we may have a little bit of time to think about business operations given the calendar and where we find ourselves on it here in Alta. So obviously the major question before us today is what has changed at the state and county level with regard to emergency orders that are in place. The Utah Leads Together plan, of course, provides for a color-coded scale of hazard levels and a range of precautions and regulations that are in place per the status. And late last week, the governor announced that we're in the orange phase of our response to the COVID-19 pandemic. And of course, Salt Lake County Mayor Jenny Wilson followed suit in issuing a new order on April 30th. Sort of de-escalating is maybe not the right word to describe the effect of that order, but the order did augment and change some of the regulations that were in place and provide a new range of restrictions and precautions for commercial entities and government operations and all the rest. So, our relationship to that in Alta, where of course we have a number of emergency orders that are still in effect until May 13th, is a major question before us today, and we'll get to potential action items later in the meeting. But per the agenda, the purpose of the first portion of this work session is to talk about that and hear from Drs. Ken and Carolyn about their perspective on state of the pandemic in Utah, the state of our the emergency orders we've applied in Alta, and which we need to discuss whether to readopt or allow to expire, et cetera. So with that, I think I'll turn it over to the mayor and to our guests.
Thanks, Chris, for that summary of and kind of the situation statement. One thing I want to say is thank you to Ken and Carolyn and all of the staff and all of the community members and the businesses for our quick action in March, which have, among other things, perhaps good luck, perhaps other things, have led to, while there are all these cases in Salt Lake County and Utah, we don't have cases in Alta, as Chris said. And I think that is a big achievement. And credit to our community. So I spoke with Ken a little while ago today about the status of our emergency orders, which are not any longer fully consistent with the governor's orders or the counties. We have a pending request just formally because on May 1st we needed to address that inconsistency. But it is also pretty clear that the conditions have changed both in terms of public attitude and perhaps in terms of the medical situation. Just that seems true too, to some extent. So some change in our order is probably warranted. So Ken and Carolyn, if you'd like to offer your comments, and feel free to reflect on our conversation earlier, Ken, and I'll chime in later.
Or I guess before we start, I was just interested in the format of this. On the upper left of my screen, I see live on YouTube. So this is an open work session.
Yes, this is a public meeting. It has been noticed according to the Open Meetings Act, and anyone can watch it on YouTube. We do not have open participation in the meeting, especially given some of the concerns with people disrupting the meeting. We have had a backup plan each time in case we do get disrupted. Jen will be contacting you with a new address to re-log in, but okay. These are public comments.
Okay, I guess I'm gonna just start by saying that in the town of Alta, just my observation is that I think the town of Alta might be the most on it in terms of having only one person in the town office at a time. Just in Powder Ridge, there are several construction projects that are now underway again. So I think that, as Chris and maybe the mayor said, how people respond to this closure is not being applied in any sort of a uniform fashion. I'm going to turn it over to Carolyn, and the reason that you saw her getting out of the shower was she had been at work at IMC emergency department, and I think she could probably speak the best right now about what is going on sort of in the front lines in Salt Lake County.
Okay. So today I had the pleasure of working in the COVID only unit. So when you walk into the emergency department at IMC, if you have any symptoms that seem to be related to COVID, you go to that space. The entire ward is a negative pressure ward. And so I wore a PAPR my entire shift.
Why don't you explain what?
I think, you know, that's the like battery pack thing that blows around your head, and I can demonstrate a picture of me today. But I want to say, this is me at work today. I don't know if that shows up. Is that the camera? Anyway, that's what the paper looks like. So I think that Alta has been a saving grace for so many of my coworkers. So many nurses, physicians have had the pure joy of coming up here and staying 6 feet away from others and walking in the sunshine. And so whoever is responsible for my mental health and peace, if I cannot thank you enough, and my partners cannot thank you enough. I thought about sending pictures of skiing and then in the PAPR the next day, but I thought probably that's really not what people want to know. But anyway, thank you. You know, as far as what we are planning on, we have changed sort of nothing in the Intermountain healthcare system as far as anticipating continued surges and continuing making plans for what might come. I think everybody knows the data. I think Chris did a great job presenting the data of, you know, we have a flattened curve, but we anticipate that it's going to stay like that for another 10 to 12 weeks. That would actually be great if it stayed like that. And then maybe we could gradually open things and go down to the yellow phase. But, you know, that puts us at the opening of school. And each one of these phases is going to be another 12 weeks. So I'm not sure if there's specific questions that you wanted either Kenneth or I to address, and I'm happy to do so.
Well, I'll just reflect a couple things that I've learned from my meetings with Salt Lake County Command that are complementary to what you just said. And I think that, you know, they're expecting some resurgence, and they're expecting it to hit in the fall in particular, which is unfortunate given the business that our town is in. And I know that Mike Mon will speak during the regular town council meeting when he gives his Alta ski area report about some of their expectations for the winter. I had a very interesting interchange with the director of Salt Lake County Health, where and their intelligence people, where I had to insist that they be clear that there's a difference between a decrease and a decreasing rate of increase. And that is not, that distinction doesn't seem to be readily grasped by the political decision makers. I think the medical decision makers know the difference, or the medical personnel.
Absolutely. I mean, we continue to see, 150 cases a day. That is not changing, and that is going to continue to be at that rate. And we actually look at that as an accomplishment for now.
Right, right. Yeah, and so they changed their language from decreasing to stable, and so that does seem to be where we are.
Yes.
I guess I would be very interested, and I think the town council would be very interested, given the item on our agenda about extending the existing emergency action. I can declare an emergency. It lasts for 30 days. It requires the town council to continue a state of emergency. Within the state of emergency, new emergency orders and amended emergency orders can be issued. I would be very interested, and I think everyone would be interested to know what kind of practices should be in place for the next little while. The emergency order was extended by a month. I would anticipate another month, just because that's the schedule of our town council meetings.
Go ahead.
So I think this is a very complicated situation that requires a balancing of the risk reward ratio. I do think that we need to exist somewhat in sync with the adjoining communities as well as the county. I know that I spoke with Harris about what Summit County has enacted as of the 30th of April. They are making moves to reopen, a fair amount of their businesses, but with a lot of enforceable conditions. I think that we need to look at this, and what's going to occur is that we won't see the effects of the social changes for about 2 or 3 weeks. So if people are able to understand their personal responsibilities, I think that we should open up in a manner that is consistent with health department guidelines.
It's interesting. On Tuesday, I don't know if any of you saw this data that Angela Dunn kind of put out and spoke about that. So the 3 counties that have been, not counties, but 3 districts that have been hit the hardest in this past week. It's Rose Park, West Valley, and the other one, Mill Creek. And so I'm sort of like, wow, why did Mill Creek get hit so hard? And I haven't actually heard like it's because they hike together or whatever. But I do think that that's an interesting data point that I don't know if anybody really understands. But, you know, Mill Creek is not the Rose Park demographic.
Yeah, so I want to give the other town council members an opportunity to pose some questions to you. But I'll just say that I think that you're absolutely right about the risk reward ratio being important now, because, you know, having businesses closed and people out of work presents clear risk of mortality and morbidity to people. And so it's not as though there's a loss function on both sides, and things to be gained on both sides. So we have to be careful and judicious about what we do. I will say that in a conversation I had this morning with people at the health department, they did not want to give me what I would call a medical response. They gave me a political response, which was the county is working very hard to be fully aligned with the governor. That was kind of the refrain. So I think that Summit County is doing some additional steps. My expectation is, like in the earlier rounds, we can make the case that Alta has some unique characteristics that, like Park City and Summit County, may justify different approaches than the general state or Salt Lake County approaches. So let me offer the other council members the opportunity to get into this conversation. Is there somebody who would like to say anything?
Thank you very much. I don't have any questions.
Okay, Cliff. Yeah, maybe it's easiest given the format if I just go through the role, so to speak. Sheridan, do you have something on your mind?
Doctors, I wonder if you could speak to how the curve is flattening when I look at the graphs and it looks like it's just skyrocketing up. Can you help me understand that? And then secondarily, could you speak to the utility of not being in step from a public health perspective with the governor and county mayor's current recommendations?
I think that Harris did a good job when you said, you talked a little bit about the curve and not increasing the rate. And I agree, it's a funny thing to look at, Sheridan, because it is gradually growing up. But when you look, and maybe the mathy people in the room like Margaret, but it's like that logarithmic, you know, sort of growth. Mm-hmm. So instead of it continuing to go like this, it has actually gone like that. But yeah, there's still almost a couple hundred cases a day, and it's going to stay like that. But like things like the R naught,
like this, as opposed to this.
Yes. Thank you.
This still doesn't look great to me.
It doesn't, and it shouldn't, but there are some really great things. Okay. So when we started with the R naught is when you have the disease, how many people do you give it to, right? So the R naught, when we started in Utah, was what, like 5-ish? And now it's like 1-ish. So people are giving it to fewer people. So we have flattened the curve in Utah. All models predict that our healthcare system will do fine in Utah if we have an increase in cases. So that's changed significantly in the past couple of weeks. So that was the first question. Then the second question, I don't even know how to answer that. I think that that's really difficult because it's true all over the country though, right? Because, you know, people in Maine are doing different things than New Hampshire, and Massachusetts is really close to New Hampshire, and Massachusetts is a disaster. And so it's fascinating. I don't know what those border communities do. And you could look at yourselves when you're making a decision as a border community, like a state that's, you know.
I'll just add that if we get too far out of step, we'll be ordered to be in step is my expectation.
Mhm.
So we don't have full autonomy. We are an agency of the state. Elise?
I don't really have like a question for the doctors. It's more that I read the comments that we received from the public comments that Piper emailed to us, and it seems like a lot of people have issue with the proclamation number 4.
Mm-hmm.
Proclamation number 4 is actually going to impact me a lot. I am currently, for those of you that don't know, I had to go to Vermont about 2 weeks ago, a week and a half ago. Jonathan's mom passed away. That's where I'm at right now. And I will be coming back to Utah on Monday. The hard part is that because I sleep and live in Alta, the way that proclamation reads is I'm going to have to quarantine for 14 days.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas maybe right now I have a coworker who did leave the state, but lives right at the mouth of the canyon and is able to come to work just fine. So in some ways it's more, I think we need to just kind of discuss how our proclamations are lining up with the state right now. And, you know, I think in some ways though, we do need to continue our emergency order because I think that it's, you know, it helps us with funding, it helps us with other stuff. We just, I think, need to modify some of our proclamations to match what the state and the county's doing.
I will point out, Elise, that the governor's order requires people to quarantine for 14 days if they go to a high-risk location,
Yeah.
irrespective of whether they live in Alta
Yeah.
or Sandy or wherever.
Correct.
But it doesn't define where high risk is.
My
Correct.
colleagues who went to work in like an entire like COVID ER got to go to work the next day.
After they did what?
After they got back they got tested negative. They tested negative. So
Right.
they had to test negative. But so I don't know, you could say you have to be tested because now you can get tested. So
Yeah.
that might be one way to relieve things, that it's not,
Mhm.
it's just the nasal swab test. And so,
Yeah, and
you know,
I mean, like Vermont, where we're at, is extremely locked down. Like I haven't gone in. Well, you can't go anywhere right now. You can go get groceries, but it is more locked down than Utah ever was. And so that's just kind of what's really. It's great. And when we came out here, we drove and we were really cautious because we didn't want to get Jonathan's dad sick, and his family. And so, but it's hard it's a little confusing, I think, for some of our residents who do. You know, people are going to start to travel a little bit more this summer. And so maybe I need to go get tested for me to be able to, you know, get out of the quarantine option. But that I think just needs to be stated a little clearer. And I just know that we've received a lot of public comment. It seems like from what Piper emailed to us about that one.
We got public comments about a couple of different issues.
Yeah.
I would support if you want to know from a medical perspective, I actually took a picture of it today. I'm going to read you something that they say for healthcare workers at Intermountain Healthcare when you return to work, which I thought was really funny. So if you're a symptomatic caregiver with suspected or laboratory confirmed COVID-19, based on symptom-based strategy, you cannot return to work until 3 days have passed since recovery. So that means only 72 hours after symptoms, which I was shocked at. So that means no fever, cough, you know, or at least 10 days have passed since symptoms first appeared. So I found that really kind of interesting, and that might be something that you guys could think about mimicking for people who are returning. And then there's a bunch of other stuff. I should read it first, but I thought it was really interesting how soon you can return to not socially distancing with people at work that you're caring for, which is a lot different than you living here, isolating yourself and going to work, but still staying 6 feet away with a mask on, et cetera, you know?
So Elise, what I was going to propose during the council session, but this is leading up to that, is that we extend the order until the day following the next town council meeting. But that I commit to working with our local doctors and the health department, and within a week making adjustments. Part of the problem with trying to do it faster than that is we need to get medical advice, public health advice, we need to get legal advice, and then we need to ask the county health department to send our request for variation from the governor and the county to the state and get an answer from them. So that's why I think it could take as much as a week, but I think we can commit to having a different set of parameters in place within then. Margaret?
Thank you. I guess my questions relate also to the emergency proclamations, and some perhaps there would be more community buy-in, because you were saying part of it is the public attitude has changed, and perhaps if in your discussions or meetings you included some community members in those discussions, maybe we would get a better public response and public buy-in to the orders that are there. I think that the data that Drs. Ken and Carolyn has shared with us is great, and I'm glad to hear that the R0 is now 1 instead of 5, but it's still 1. So it'd be better if it were 0, or less than 1, sorry. But short of that, I mean, I guess, as you say, it's a political response from the health department, not a medical response.
If I could just weigh in on what I think is the biggest issue right now, is that's the proclamation number 4. I think that
I'm sorry, I didn't know anyone was in there.
Oops. I think that some modification of that needs to occur. Whether it is going for a test, whether if you have no symptoms and you resume good social distancing practices. I mean, I think those are all options. I could look into trying to get the nasal swab up at Alta. That would be a certain amount of cost, and like there's the logistics of how do we get those samples.
I think we should
to a lab.
I think we should, as long as you're, because that's a really high risk procedure to the person who's actually obtaining the sample.
Right.
So I, as the spouse, I would not allow that. But
There you have it.
I think when, one thing that I think Alta should look into, the ski resort, is going to be the antigen test. And when that gets developed, I think that you guys know the difference between that. So
the antibody test.
No, the antigen test. The antigen test is the pregnancy test, the spot test. That's currently not great, but it's that I bet is going to get great by the time ski season rolls around. That's the pregnancy test. Right now, all we have is that nasal swab tests, and then you also have the antibody tests. And I think everyone's aware that there's a lot of controversy regarding what does it mean to have antibodies. And I don't think we've really answered that question yet, but the antigen test is a different way of testing. So, and that's not high risk to the person collecting it.
Well, there are ways for people to get tests if that's what we converge on as a good procedure. I want to be careful about how much time we take at this portion of our meeting because we do have a couple of other items on the work session agenda. Let me just thank Ken and Carolyn. Thank you very much for your input. We will certainly be in touch with you again, and we'll be in touch.
Okay,
Thanks.
thank you.
All right. Let me pivot to the second item on our work session agenda, which is the budget. We sent out a tentative budget. I've gotten some feedback from a couple of council members, and I know that a couple of council members have been in touch with the staff also. I think that, as you know, we are required to pass a budget that shows a balance budget, either through revenues and expenses balancing or through revenues plus general fund money balancing with expenses. Polly said something to me the other day that I'll ask her about now to start us off in terms of the timing. But you know, we have to pass a budget in our June meeting, and we have to in May have a proposed budget as well. But Polly, can you say something about the legal
Yeah, so
environment?
the state law requires that a tentative budget be proposed at your first meeting in May, which is what you're doing now. And then you have to adopt that tentative budget prior to when you're going to, at least a week prior to when you're going to have your public hearing for the final budget. And I think the final budget has to be by the second, I can't remember the date. It's in June, mid-June,
Yeah.
which is in part why you guys have it later.
Right.
So,
we get our tax revenue figures then.
Right. So if for some reason you weren't able to come to an agreement on the tentative budget today, you could hold a special meeting between now and your June meeting.
And as I understand it, coming to a tentative budget today does not bind us to enact all the provisions of that tentative budget at the June meeting following public input.
Correct. So you just have to have a balanced budget, but this is the time where you can change things. And then of course, even once you have your final budget, you can always amend the budget, which
afterwards
is probably likely since there's so many questions about revenue for the coming year.
Right. So Piper sent out some emails with some highlights of what we prepared. This is different than the last one that we discussed. Primarily, Piper, feel free to chime in here if I don't get this right or if I miss a detail, an important fact. But I think the main source of the difference was, well, Margaret thought we were being a little optimistic, and after talking to Salt Lake County and to the ski area, to Mike Mon at the ski area, and also to our neighboring ski area at Snowbird, I talked to Dave Fields about this. I agreed. I think this is about as tight a budget as I could propose to you, we could propose to you insofar as we didn't want to reduce the staff before we know we were to have to in a worst case scenario. And we wanted a budget that was close to balancing without a whole lot of reserve fund contribution. And you can see that on, what line, remind me that what line that is where we see the balance, Piper. Is Piper there? Because I've been, oh yeah, here it is at the bottom. It's on page 11.
Sorry, I was muted.
So it's on page 11,
Okay.
I think, right? No,
I'm looking at an Excel sheet, so it's.
I know. Well, that's what I had been looking at, and now I'm looking at
1039, 200.
Okay, thank you. So it's on page, well, 1039, 200. We can do it that way. So this budget is using $14,000 out of our reserve fund. Our reserve fund currently is has a lot of money in it because it's that time of the year when it normally would, and it 1.1 million. I had Piper project if we don't have any revenue between now and November 1st, which could be true depending on our summer business, we'll be down to $542,000 on hand with this budget. Actually, it's not quite this budget because this budget includes $60,000 of additional revenue than what I asked her to figure. But with no income, we would have none of that 60,000 either. If we receive 50% of our 3-year average sales tax, and the 50% is the number that I've been given by this both ski areas, and I'll say that the county projects a decrease of 22% in sales tax, but their tourism-based tax is getting hit much more than that. So if we receive 50%, at the end of June, we'll have about, because we'll get property tax also, we'll have about between the high 5s and low 600s in our general fund balance, which is about 2/3 of what we usually would have. If the ski area doesn't open and the lodges don't have income appreciably, sales, if we're just relying on property tax, we will not make it through this budget year solvent with this budget. We'll run out of money at the end of May. So that's kind of the background to why I think this is a reasonable approach. But so the big items that we included in here that were different than the previous version is a lower assumption on sales tax revenue and a increase in our sales tax from our resort sales tax from 1 to 1.1%, which is a opportunity we have legally. So let me open it up to all of you town council members, I should say. Did it work best if I called on you one at a time? Was that useful, or do you want to just chime in? I can't believe you don't have anything to say.
I'm happy to talk. I'm happy to talk about it. First of all, it needs to be clear that the current draft that's under consideration is in no sense coming from the budget committee. That was sent around last Friday after a series of budget committee meetings over the past 2 months. And these are a lot of new ideas in the draft that was sent out last Friday that didn't come from the budget committee. I think a sales tax increase is a poor idea. You're talking about $63,000. At this point, we have not shown that it's needed. We can go month to month as the environment changes. We can look at it every month over the summer. We can start to take a hard look at it in September, October, and November as we get a better look at what the environment is going to be. I am happy to tell you that as of this week, Alta Lodge's advanced bookings look better than they did this time last year. And last year was a crushing year until we had to shut down in March. None of us know what the future is going to bring, and that's the point. Let's not raise taxes based on projections that we have no idea what's going to come forward. I'd also encourage anybody who hasn't taken a look to take a look at the projection of Utah cities and towns sales taxes done by EconoWest Associates that the Utah League of Cities and Towns just put out a few days ago. You may not like the analysis, may not think it's deep enough, might not like the typography, but at least you got to look at it and understand that analysis. So in terms of the need, we can't show the need for a sales tax increase at this point. We may see the need in the future. At this point, what's being picked up by that proposed sales tax increase would be picked up by use of $63,000 in unreserved funds, which is readily available. In terms of the damage that would be done by a sales tax increase, Alta's lodging tax rate is currently at 13.82%. Think about that. Think about that, what that looks like if you see that on your hotel bill. 13.82%. Wow, those guys are stepping on the gas. Take it up a notch, it goes to 13.92%. Park City is at 12.77%, and they are concerned about the competitive damage that they're suffering in relationship to Colorado and Wyoming, who have lodging, you're talking about Steamboat, Vail, Jackson, have lodging sales tax rates in the range of 8% to 11%. What I advocate is let's have some humility. Let's not fall in love with our projections. We don't know what the future is going to bring. We're going to look at it month to month over the next 6 months, and then we're going to be able to respond to reality instead of projections. Tax rates seem to only go one direction. Once they get raised, they don't get lowered again. So let's see what the future brings, and then we can respond. I know that our staff is super diligent and on top of looking for grants too. I know there's currently grant money out there, and we're hoping that there'll be other grant money that doesn't just relate to COVID-19 specific expenses that may come in CARES round 4 if the U.S. Congress and the President can agree on that. We have to see what comes of that. The other two minor points that I would like to make before returning to a major point is I would again encourage the mayor to not pay bonuses for the 1920 fiscal year. They certainly are richly deserved. Same is true over at the company that I assist to manage over here on the other side of the road. Our managers and staff crushed it last winter. They were awesome. We didn't pay any bonuses. Why would you in the current environment? Bonuses reflect the fact that you're doing well financially, and none of us are doing well financially at this point. On the other hand, I would encourage including in the budget at least some movement toward CPI increases, because if you don't give an inflation increase, you're giving a pay cut. And I don't want our staff to get a pay cut. And those two numbers roughly balance each other out. If we were to hold on to the remaining bonus money of roughly $8,000 for the 1920 fiscal year, keep that in our unreserved funds, do our final amendment of our 1920 budget, which we're going to have to do, then that frees up almost enough money to do a CPI increase of say 1.5%. That's, at this point, what inflation is really going to be is a moving target with what is happening to the economy. So 1.5 is a good estimate of where we want to get to so that people aren't getting a pay cut. But the important thing about maintaining CPI raises is that those will compound over the years and even decades, as they should, because then that forms the basis of the next year's pay and so on. And if we don't do that, we're cutting people's pay. The final thing to bring all this back together, as we, with open minds, humility, skepticism, watch what happens over the next 5-6 months and understand where the world is going 5-6 months from now, then at that point, everything should be on the table. The idea of a sales tax increase is a little ironic because you're only making your sales tax producers less competitive, but it's also ironic because if you're projecting 50%, well, then you're only going to get 50% of the sales tax increase. So it's hurting, but it's not helping that much. If we are in dire condition 5-6 months from now, we have to look at everything, including going to every department manager and saying, show me what it looks like if you cut your budget 10%, 15%, 20%. All those things have to be on the table when we learn the facts. Harris, you're muted.
Yeah, I got
I'll
it.
trade places with you.
Thanks, Cliff. Okay, so I just want to, I can address the bonus versus raise question a little bit later, but I just want to make sure that everybody understands that at least what I took you to mean is that you would increase this line 1039-200 from 14,000 to approximately 75 or 80,000.
Yes, that's right. I would increase the use of unreserved funds by roughly the 63,000 that you're looking for.
Okay. All right. I see Elise on the screen I happen to be looking at, so let me call on you.
I don't have anything right now.
Okay. Sheridan?
I share many of Cliff's concerns, particularly about the direction that taxes tend to go when we raise them. I wonder if we might consider not accelerating our payments towards infrastructure debt as a possible way to buy us a little time, given this uncertain moment. That would be another thing that I'd like to have us consider. I know that we're scrambling. This is a pandemic. And yet it's a little troubling to see that this came to us so recently and wasn't vetted by the budget committee. That being said, I think that now we can discuss it fairly and in full, and all things should be examined.
Piper, can you point to the lines of the where the debt owed to the general fund is being repaid?
It's coming in that 1039 group.
So there's a transfer from
Sewer fund and from water fund.
right. So,
420 and 430.
right. So just let me say something about those. The sewer fund and the water fund owe the money to the general fund. We inherited those debts. The sewer fund, this is a 100% repayment of its debt. And the water fund, we had agreed some time ago, I can't remember if it was 1 or 2 years, to pay that off slowly. I give Piper a lot of credit for, I think, a very clever way to make this budget less painful than it otherwise would. This would take another to replace those with both would take another $87,000. So now we'd be at 150,000 out of reserve funds if we were to just delete those. Margaret?
Thank you. Questions that I had also related to potentially other sources. We have a lot of money identified in 1039-410, the impact fund. And the question I had was whether we could or should simply delay these feasibility studies, and that would gain us potentially 77K, and maybe the impact funds have to be designated for transportation purposes, but maybe that money could go to 4x4 order metering, or maybe even the AVI camera acquisitions as a way to cover those costs and then not have them come out of the budget. Another concern I had was, according to an email I had from Piper, part of our planning and zoning budget for legal professional services was for 17K for work related to Patsy Marley. And I'm just wondering what additional Patsy Marley legal work we need to do that we would expect that kind of expense. And then the third major item was the ACBB. I have no idea, but so much of anecdotal information I get is that the visitors coming to Alta and to the lodges are repeat. This isn't their first time coming here. They come back year over year. We don't really know, or I don't know, what the direct revenue connection is between our advertising budget and revenues. And third thing is it appropriate at this time for the town to support businesses on basically the backs of all property owners? Is that potentially revenue that in this time of crisis is potentially usable somewhere else? And then as we come back online, that we look at restoring or revamping or evaluating what our policy is related to the town providing this particular service to the businesses versus a tax credit or something else. I mean, it's in effect a tax credit to the businesses on the shoulders of all property taxpayers in the town, property tax and sales taxpayers.
Yeah. So let me say a couple of things. I think that there was, if I understood you correctly, Margaret, I think that you're confusing the impact fund with the fourth quarter sales tax in terms of its restriction to transportation. The impact fund is also restricted to the kinds of uses that we can put it to, but it wouldn't include a 4x4 metering, for example. That's the fourth quarter sales tax. So we were careful to use, this was, I thought, another clever move by the staff to suggest moving this money from the impact fund balance into being a transfer into the general fund, because we have eligible expenses currently, and we don't always and haven't always, and there is a a time limit on when we can use the money. So not only did I think we needed it this year, but it also was, I thought, a good way to take care of a balance that we can't continue to carry very long on our books. And I'm glad that at the last part of what you said that you added the sales tax payers, because typically that's about 70% of our budget. So that it is true that the property tax payers are responsible for some of this. But as you know, this budget cuts the ACVB by half of our previous year's support. It's 1 minute after 5. I think we need to wrap up the work session. I'm sorry that we didn't get all the way through our agenda, but I think we need to move to the regular meeting because we have public who are joining us for that purpose. I'd like to call the town council meeting of Wednesday, May 6th, the Alta Town Council meeting of Wednesday, May 6th to order. Our first item on our agenda, just want to check in with Jen. We don't have to do something electronically for a different meeting, do we?
We don't. It's just
okay.
rolling it up and checking that it
Okay.
fits.
Okay, good.
About 10 people watching.
Okay. So the first item on our agenda is citizen input. That was due yesterday in writing. Piper, to Piper, we received 3, I think.
Yes.
Okay. Do you want to read them like we did in our last electronic meeting? These are longer than the previous ones. I don't know, Polly, if do they need to be read verbatim or can they be summarized?
You can summarize them, and Piper, can you just confirm that they'll be on the website if anybody in the public
Yes.
wants to read them? They have been distributed to the council in
Yes.
full.
Okay. Piper, do you want to summarize them or shall I?
You could do that.
Okay. Okay. So the first is from, let me just get my mouse working properly. Okay. Which it's not doing for some reason. Okay. The first of these is from Adrian Ruderman and Dan Kentner, speaking as principals at the Alta chalets. And they point out that vacation rental homes, I think they mean, but they may mean condos too, are different than hotel rooms. And so they're talking about our emergency order. They are getting requests from people to rent homes with separate, perhaps many of which have separate entrances. I don't know if all of their properties do. And so they would request that vacation rentals be treated differently under an emergency order. The second is from Frank Perkins, who also rents properties doing business as Canyon Services. He says his condos, which are not all separate buildings, but they do have separate entrances. And both of these letters speak to the issue of housekeeping, which I'll point out the Summit County rules are pretty strict about the housekeeping. And then the third public comment is from John Burns' email address. He's the first signatory, but it also is signed by Paul Moxley, Dave Richards, Paul Gangaware, and Evan Singer and Susan Sosin. I guess they're writing as co-householders. And in this letter, they are complaining about the aspect of our emergency order that requires quarantine for people coming from out of state. They say that it's discriminatory, which surprised me because I had an earlier conversation with John about just that point. And at the end of that conversation, he wrote to me and he said, I acknowledge that I didn't read number 4 correctly and that it applies to all people traveling to Alta, not just second homeowners. Although this letter restates his concern that it singles out second homeowners. He has some suggested responses to this, which I think we would be concerned about, that we would look at carefully. I will say that the governor requires quarantine if you are coming from, as we discussed in the work session, a high risk area. And his rules would be in effect regardless of whether we relaxed ours. Okay. I think that's all the citizen input, right, Piper?
Yes, I will say that the first 2 also do mention that their target people that they built up the business are people that coming from Salt Lake and not out of state. They seem to both make that point.
Okay. Yeah, and they would, of course, not be subject, even under the currently enforced orders, they would not be subject to the quarantine rule. But they are prohibited from short-term nightly rentals. So there are a couple of different concerns. Some of them are concerned about the nightly rental aspect, and some are concerned about the quarantine if you're coming from out of state.
Right.
Aspect of order 4. Okay, Mike Mon is next on the agenda with an update from the Alta ski lifts.
Hello there, everyone. Thank you for letting me join, and thank you for being able to meet under these unique circumstances again. So I'd just like to first thank the town for the cooperation that we've had during the last, since we shut down, and being able to work together to provide the option for people to come and do uphill travel and ski. And, we've worked together to kind of accommodate the crowds and deal with restrooms and such. We have received hundreds of letters, emails from people just thanking us for having the ski area open for uphill traffic. And people in general have acted really well and practices social distancing. We've had a few incidences where we've had to remind people to be a little better, but overall it's been a very well received and been a good thing that we've been able to do. It's kind of changed as of last week. We've started to move into our summer operations, and so we're now plowing out areas, plowing the summer road. We've plowed the road to Alf's, plowing out the base terminals. So the options around the base area and some of those routes are now starting to go away. But we're still having people every day that come and are taking advantage of the opportunity to skin up and make a run on the mountain. We're looking at, based upon the abrupt end of the season, our preliminary projections are our revenues for this past year will be down 15 to 20%. So as you're thinking about your sales tax revenue or whatever, that's kind of what we're seeing for this year that's coming to an end. Our goal during the last 6 weeks has been how do we take care of our employees? How do we be fair to them? And how do we do the same thing with the skiing public? And so, as we've looked at downsizing and bringing the end of the season to employees, we've tried to implement that throughout our company. We are now down to our summer operating staff. All of the seasonals have now moved on. And so we're down to about probably 75 to 80 people is what our summer staff level is. We have received approval from the Forest Service to move forward with our projects. The Albion parking lot expansion on the east end. The Sunnyside Pitch 1 will be regraded with that fill. The contractor is currently on track for being here on June 1st. All of this is, of course, subject to where we are today, and if things continue to stay this way and we don't have a reoccurrence that results in an additional tightening of the restrictions. We did have a project of putting avalanche fence and some Vison towers up on Devil's Castle Road and the East Castle. Those materials were scheduled to come from Italy, and given the situations in India, we have put that project on hold. Don't know that we want to send any money over there at this point in time until we know that they're up and running. We are moving forward. Our current summer plan, it would be to still have a booth to control access into the Albion Basin. We are looking at, can we do payment methods maybe a little different, more touchless, less exchanging, of having maybe we're even looking at removing the paper maps and having a QR code that you scan in your phone to get all the information on your phone rather than in a physical piece of paper. We're looking at a variety of options of how do we operate now with this pandemic in place to minimize its spread if people do show up that maybe happen to have that and aren't aware of it, and protect our employees at the same time. So we're looking at the booth. We are still looking at having potentially a little campground store. And other than that, no lift operations, no Albion Grill, no other things at the base. We would have the restrooms at the campground, the Catherine's Trailhead open and regularly cleaned, porta potties at that base, some porta potties in Grizzly Lot. And then the Albion base, we haven't quite decided what we're doing there, either porta potties or opening those restrooms. We're going to see how the construction goes through there. So that's kind of a little bit about the summer. In regards to next season, we've been in a lot of conversations with a lot of ski areas. Just got off a call yesterday with I think it was like 28 ski areas on the Mountain Collective call, talking about the impacts we're seeing now, the impacts we're seeing on summer, and some of the concerns about next winter. Lots of uncertainties, everybody knows. Customer feedback, as people have started to go out with credits or other things for selling passes next year, everybody that's selling passes is way down in volume at this point in time. The number one question from people is, well, what's going to happen if I buy a season pass and you can't open, or you can only open with limited capacity? That seems to be a significant detriment right now to people, and the fact that a lot of people are maybe economically in a worse off position right now, and so they're tighter. So most ski areas are pushing back deadlines. We have elected not to go on sale at this point in time and ask our customers for any money. We're watching what the others do and what their deadlines are and when they are, and we'll try to at least give our pass holders an opportunity to purchase and make decisions before some of the major deadlines come and go. None of the a lot of ski areas have talked about trying to reopen if conditions changed. Snowbird and Brighton in particular, 3 or 4 days ago, were both thinking about opening this week. Brighton has now backed off and says no, they will not reopen. And my last discussion with Dave Fields is it's highly unlikely that they will open. Mount Baldy ski area in California tried to open. They came up with a plan that dealt with social distancing in their lift lines, no food service, restrooms only. And they were estimating they could maybe accommodate 10% capacity. They got overrun the first few days and had challenges, and they pulled the plug and said, we're not doing this. The general consensus in talking with most of the resorts that have summer operations, there's a high concern that summer operations are going to be opportunities for ski areas this summer. Best case scenario, they're thinking they may get 25 to 50% of their normal summer capacity in best case. And to get there, most of them are still under a lockdown that they can't do anything. Jackson Hole is really driven by the national parks, Yellowstone and Grand Teton, which currently aren't scheduled to open to the 15th of June, so they don't know where they're going. We, as we've looked at plans and had discussions with other ski areas, we're trying to explore how do we open if we're under a similar restriction to we are today as far as social distancing. Things that we've looked at are in current discussion. Current preliminary plans have looked like that you only have one maze line, and people can only ride on a chair with members of their current household or people they came with. Restaurants being reduced to 25 to 30 or 40% of their capacity to put social distancing in place. So there's a lot of, and when people look at those models and start to run the numbers, a fair number of skiers are saying, well, we can't even break even under those set of circumstances. So we're kind of in this Cliff Curry mode of, we got to wait and see. We have to see what happens between now and the next 3 or 4 months before we really have an accurate idea of where it's going to go. We've got to be flexible, but we're going to watch very carefully our partner ski areas that are in the Mountain Collective that are in Australia, New Zealand, and Chile. They are all just going into their seasons now. They're still on lockdowns, but their restrictions are going to be lifting. And I think they're going to be kind of the test case for us to see what will work and what won't work, and may enable us to have an idea sooner than later, maybe by mid-summer, as to what situation that we may see ourselves in this winter. There is a general consensus among the ski areas that, and I think the public too, is this virus is not going to go away. We probably won't have a vaccine before it's time to open for next season. And, so kind of the most optimistic view right now is that we could be at about maybe have a season that we make 50% of our income. I would hope that it's going to be a lot better than that and things would turn around, but that's kind of where people currently are today based upon what we know, but it's all up in the air, as has been said, and we'll wait and see. And our goal is, we have, like our summer staff, we think we have enough work and the resources to keep them busy through the summer on the projects we need to finish up and just work on the mountain. But then we'll have to evaluate and see where we're at as we get to that fall season and look at where do we go to from there. Questions? Anyone have any questions for us?
Yeah, I have a question, Mike. This is Margaret. The question relates to the summer season. What do you anticipate in terms of social distancing or other measures in that time period before we actually get to the ski season, where you're projecting 50% reduction as an optimistic number?
We've got two different camps on that issue. There's one side where we think we're going to get overrun, is that everybody will be trying to escape from the valley to go do something where they can have social distancing and stay away from other people. And so we will have more demand than we've had in the past trying to come into the canyon and into the Albion Basin in particular. And then the other one is that people will be muted a little bit because of the social distancing concerns. We're focused on, how do we continue to restrict and manage visitation in the basin in a way that we can do it that maintains appropriate social distancing. We're relying some degree onto the Forest Service as to what they expect out on trails and trailheads and so forth, and we will follow the guidance that they in the county and even the town may have in place. one of the challenges that Snowbird had came up with a pretty elaborate plan of, you had to have a reservation to ski. They had a certain number of parking spots that they were going to allow to be in their parking, and the 10-foot distancing between vehicles. And the bottom line came down to is the thing that's kind of tempered them back from that is they believe the demand will be far greater than they can accommodate, and people would park on the road or park at Alta or do whatever they need to do and walk in and overrun their facilities. And that could be, you know, I have some concern that may be where we end up into the summer a little bit. It depends on, I believe, how open our economy becomes, how many people go back and get busy doing other things, or how many people are still looking for things to do because they are not working.
But at this point, you don't have any specific capacity plans or measures. You're waiting for the Forest Service to give you guidelines for what they expect or anticipate for the trails and for the parking lots?
That's correct. Currently, right now, we're just saying that we would continue as we did last year, having, you know, just letting the number of cars into the Albion Basin. There are parking spots. We have not proposed widening those to make the parking, you know, like closing every other one or anything at this point in time. We're kind of waiting for their direction. As far as we know, the campground is going to be allowed to open. We just submitted our plan to the Forest Service today, and which they will review and they will give us comment. And so most of it was just focused on how do we, at this point in time, minimize the spread of a virus between our employees and the general public, and the general public between themselves to some degree. You know, one of the concerns is the restrooms.
Sure.
That's you know, the Forest Service, in some places, they've actually closed the restrooms and not have them available. Don't know, well, that may limit the spread of the virus through the restrooms. It may not be the best for the environment at the same time. So it's up there. So it's still fairly new, and we anticipate that the forest is going to have to deal with this across the forest. And we're, you know, just looking to be a willing partner in whatever direction they provide in that regard.
I was listening to the last thing you said. I forgot what I was gonna. Oh, yeah. When you drive home and you see the crowds at Bell Canyon Trailhead, I'm sure that gives you pause.
It does, yeah. It's, you know, it's more than it's. Here we are at this point in time, and there's more cars on Bell's Canyon Trailhead than you've seen in the middle of the summer on a holiday.
Right. Okay. Is there? Were you more or less done
Yes.
when you asked for questions? Okay.
Yes.
Let me just pose one to you. As I've related to for a while now, our conversations about the issues that face the town are extensive, and you are one of the major property owners in the town of Alta, and we are now in a period where property owners can weigh in on the decision to move into the Unified Fire Service area. So I thought that I'd give you an opportunity to make a comment if you'd like.
Our understanding of the issues, as we've tried to stay abreast and understand the options, it appeared, you know, like no one wants to pay more in tax, and no one wants a tax increase, but I do not see another. It seemed like that moving into the UFSA was the least painful of the options that are out there, I guess you could say, to be able to provide those services. And be great to have another alternative that even wasn't as impactful as that, but I don't know that there is one that I'm aware of.
Thank you. Were there any more questions for Mike? We're kind of right on schedule if we move to the consent agenda, but I don't want to cut anybody off prematurely. Okay, we have the next item on the agenda then is the approval of the consent agenda, which includes the minutes from the April 8th meeting, the treasurer's reports with highlights, and the staff reports. Is there a motion to approve those, the consent agenda?
So moved.
Moved. Haha. Seconded.
Okay, it was moved by Elise and seconded by Sheridan. Comments, discussion? Okay, hearing none. All those in favor of approving the consent agenda, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, I got
Aye.
a thumbs up from Cliff. Okay. And a thumbs up from Margaret. Okay, so it's unanimously approved. Thank you. The next item on our agenda is the UFA report. I saw Ken join us a little while ago, and that was actually what cued me to realize that we were getting close to 5 o'clock. So, Chief.
Good evening. How is everybody?
Okay.
Good. So just a little bit of an update on what UFA has been up to this last week, or this last month. We've been busy with COVID, as you all have been as well. So we changed from a 48-hour planning session and operational period. For what we do with incidents is we plan incidents and incident management based on an operational period. And we did that in relation to what our crews do in the field. They work a 48-hour shift. And so we had a 48-hour operational period and a planning cycle in order to put together plans on how we approach each of those 48-hour shifts. Initially, with our whole approach to this, we were quite busy ensuring that all of our personnel had proper PPE, that we had the equipment that we needed to provide patient care, and we did extensive training with our crews with the use of the different types of equipment that would be used related to COVID. It's not significantly different than what we would normally do, other than we had to be vigilant in the wearing of the PPE, ensuring that when we met patients, we were doing our initial assessment from a distance, and changed things for patients and patients' families significantly. Normally, we would take patients' families with us when we transport them to the hospital, but the hospitals have no visitor restrictions right now, and so it made things really difficult for people that needed to go to the hospital, both that were COVID positive and patients that needed to go to the hospital just because they had something happening in their life. They had a heart attack or a stroke or any other medical condition that would require them to be transported to the hospital. They were going by themselves, and in most cases were by themselves for the duration of their stay in the hospital. So it's a lot different than we normally would do things. But I think we've been really successful in our approach. Through our whole organization, we only had one of our employees that is tested positive, and that was likely because of some travel right before this started in early March. And he tested positive right at the very beginning. We've had no other employees test positive for this, and we've had several hundred patient transports of patients that were COVID positive and exposures to patients that were COVID positive. So I think our personnel is doing a really good job approaching this, keeping themselves safe, making sure that patients and family members are well taken care of with the guidelines that we've been given. And so I feel comfortable that we are in a good spot in being able to move forward. We're just hoping that we don't see a significant surge as things start to open up, as everybody is concerned with. We're prepared. We have several stations that have had an increase in the call volumes that they normally have. Some of those areas that respond to care centers, assisted living centers that have had some pretty significant struggles with this. A lot of their residents have tested positive. A lot of their staff have tested positive. And so it's been difficult for those areas. And so we do have stations that respond to those on a regular basis. We also have a quarantine and isolation facility that was stood up in the Holiday Mill Creek area, and that's a couple of our stations respond to that particular location. But we have a number of stations that have had very little exposure to this because of where they're located. You all have had a significant decrease in the call volume that you've had around the town of Alta. The numbers that I have for the second quarter, so starting April 1st through now, so a little over a month, there have been a total of 4 calls is all in the town of Alta. So, you know, from what Mike was saying there, I've been in the canyon, and I know that it's not lack of people that are recreating. I think that people are being careful, and it's nice that people are still allowed up in the canyon. I think it's something that people are doing to stay sane in this crazy time, and they're staying safe as well. So significant decrease in the call volumes that you've had. We have changed from that 48-hour cycle to a 7 days planning cycle and operational cycle. So if you are interested, those documents that we put together every 7 days that are basically our plan for those 7 days are available. We can send those out, as well as our briefing that we do for our crews at the beginning of that period. Each area of responsibility provides some information to our crews that goes out. And so I believe Chris is receiving those, and if not, we can make sure that he is. And if you're interested in seeing those, he can forward those to y'all.
Jay, I get those as a board member. They are stamped with a do not distribute kind of note. So I haven't thought that I could forward those on. Is that?
I think it's fine for you to forward those on to your council members and city officials for sure. I think that's totally appropriate, but probably you're right. It's probably not something that we would send out to the general public, but any kind of town official or town employee would be fine, so that you know what our plan is as UFA.
Okay, good.
We are in the middle of the budget cycle or the budget approval process. So tomorrow the UFA Finance Committee will be meeting, and each different division or area within UFA will be presenting their own individual budgets to the Finance Committee for questions and discussion. So that is occurring tomorrow. We just completed an assistant chief promotional process. So within UFA, our structure is such that we have a chief, and then we have 3 assistant chiefs. One of our assistant chiefs is going to be retiring later this month, and so we have a process in order to promote somebody to take that position. And the person that got that position is Dominic Burchett. He's our current Wildland Fire Division chief, and he'll be transitioning into that position in the coming weeks. He'll do a fantastic job in that super strong background with wildland fire. And, you know, I think he's done a lot with helping Chris with some of the wildland fire planning for the town of Alta. But that is one thing about Unified Fire, is we have a very strong background within the wildland fire organization nationally. And so there are plenty of people that will be ready to take his spot that he's vacating as he moves up into this new assistant chief position.
And can I ask you a finance question? I'll find out. I could ask this tomorrow, but I think this is a good place to ask it because I'm on the finance committee. I'll be at that meeting. But it's of particular interest to us moving into the UFSA, since the tax value is the source of the funding. Have you heard anything coming out of the Salt Lake County Assessor's Office about changes in the assessed value? I mean, I'm concerned about them going down, obviously not. They go up in the valley, that just helps us.
Right. I am not sure if
Okay.
if that's going to be changing or how it will change. You know, I do know that several departments in the valley that are dependent on sales tax are struggling, and will struggle for the coming year, as anyone will. It depends on sales tax. But I'm not sure what Salt Lake County, if anything, they're doing to adjust that.
Well, I'll ask that question tomorrow, and I'll let the council know what I learn about that.
All of us in all of our individual divisions have been asked to scrutinize our own budgets and to make cuts where we can, eliminate things that can be put off in the coming year. We are not going to do any kind of market or CPI adjustments that we would normally do. So we're trying to be as lean as we can for this budget cycle. Recruit Academy is near finishing. They sped things up to try to get our recruits finished with the 32 recruits that we have. We were really scared that if one of them were to get sick, it would spread quickly among the group because they work closely together. And so far, they've been able to keep everyone healthy. And we were able to condense some of the things we do at the very end of the recruit camp. And so it is going to be finishing in about a week and a half. So it's finishing up 2 weeks earlier than initially intended. So it's great. We'll be able to get additional firefighter personnel out and riding in some of the seats that we've had to fill either with overtime or have run empty. So that's a good thing. And your Alta resident is still doing well, and we're anticipating that she will finish up and be a great addition to UFA.
Are we losing a patrol? You can't have one of my dispatchers or cops, you know.
I know. One of the things that this has caused us to struggle with a little bit is just our testing for firefighter testing, for the testing of new paramedics, new EMTs, any kind of the training that we put on that requires a test at the end of that. All of that testing has been put on hold, and so that is something that we're trying to figure out different ways to do that. Obviously, you can still manage exams that are done online, but some of the performance evaluations are tricky to do. So that the firefighter tests that you have to take that are actually performing certain skills will be put off until the state feels like it's appropriate to do those. But we do our own in-house testing to ensure that everyone is up to par where they need to be prior to us utilizing them as a firefighter or as an EMT. This time of year, we would always like to remind you to be safe around your waterways with people coming up and recreating. It's runoff is going to start increasing. And another good reminder for you guys is that your citizens be safe around any of the snow bridges. So, Grizzly Gulch that starts to melt and often melts from the bottom up from the creek, those snow bridges can be dangerous this time of year. So that's our safety message and reminder for this time of year. I think that's about it for UFA. If you have any questions for me, I'm happy to answer.
Council members, do you have questions for Jay? I know that I got a chat from Ken. Did you communicate with Ken, Jen, or should we ask him directly?
I did not.
Sorry, am I
Oh,
on?
you're still there. Go ahead, Ken. You had a question for Jay.
I do have a question for Jay and how this all interrelates. So my understanding is that the costs for the UFA services has gone up due to the increase in the calls. Is that true? More or less?
No. So related to joining UFSA or, so I guess maybe what your question is if the town of Alta had decided not to join UFSA, then cost is broken down based on the sharing of call volume between what is UFSA, which is anything outside of the town of Alta and the rest of the canyon, versus call volume within the town of Alta. So they know what the cost of providing service is from station 113, and so that the town of Alta would be assessed a cost based on how many calls are run within the town of Alta versus how many calls are run outside of the town of Alta. So they would just project what that cost is based on number of calls within the town of Alta versus outside. So by joining UFSA though, those costs that goes away, and the cost is just based on property value.
So I think in the past, if I had called Gold Cross for transports out of the clinic, the number of calls, the gross number of calls would have been reduced. And would that maybe have not made the increase be as much?
I'm not sure. I think that it may have, I don't know that it would have a direct relationship.
Well,
The cost, go ahead, Mayor.
There are two factors there on use, Ken, but this particular aspect is something that I think we can talk about. It's not really on our agenda to talk about the UFSA structure, but let me just say that it's a function of two factors: our usage cost. It's what we use relative to what Snowbird uses. So a reduction in our usage has to be taken relative to whether their usage is going down or up. So that's one aspect of that issue. The other issue is long ago, we brought up the issue, the possibility of using Gold Cross rather than UFSA for emergency transport, but keeping UFSA for fire service. And that was not something the Chief Peterson was really willing to entertain.
Okay, maybe we should.
But I'm happy to talk about it
later because I'm the one that calls them
Right.
the most. So
Sure.
anything I can do to keep the cost reduced for the town and the property owners, let me know.
Okay. Yeah, I'm happy to talk to you, and the staff are pretty well apprised of these details, I think, at this point too. So you're welcome to talk to any of them, or obviously anybody. We can get you in touch with the Chief Peterson too, if you want. Okay. Thanks, Jay. Are there questions either for Jay, further questions from the council for Jay, or questions for the staff members about the departmental reports? Okay, seeing none, I'll move to the next item on the agenda, which is discussion and possible action on resolution 2020 R8, a resolution extending the period of emergency proclamation until I think it's June 18th is how this is drafted. Yeah, which is the day following. We chose that for this draft as the day following our next town council meeting. If we don't pass an extension, I, as mayor, do not have the authority to extend the emergency. That power belongs to the town council. So it will expire on the 14th of May, otherwise.
Mayor, do you have any, I know you had expressed that you're going to address the concerns from our citizens in that letter about Proclamation 4.
Yeah.
Some heavy hitters signing on to that letter. What about the other two letters? Did you have thoughts about
Yeah.
some changes based on those?
Yeah. I think that so the governor released his order just at the end of last week, and the county followed suit. And today is Wednesday. So, and the staff and I have had extensive discussion about this. And today is when I got called. We have not yet heard, at least as of right now. Like I said, we did ask the governor through the county to tell us if we needed to vacate our emergency order, and we have not heard back. So things have been up in the air for the last few days, and we haven't had a chance to really do the research that I would be doing between now and next week. We just heard from, like I said, we just heard from the health department. So this is all very tentative after having spoken to Dr. Ken earlier today, and I think that we could open the short-term rentals. I don't think the lodges are going to open because they have all told me they didn't expect to open anyway, but that would allow for the rental homes to be generating revenue for those businesses and accommodating those customers. I am a little concerned about the single, and I got support from this from the health department, and I don't want to speak for Dr. Ken, who, if he's still on, but my understanding of our conversation was that the single entry locations are more problematic. So for example, a freestanding house is one question, but the blackjack is another, because the hallways are common and indoors, and anybody going in and out of there could potentially serve as a source of infection for anybody in the building. So those are the kinds of considerations that I think need to be thought through carefully. The quarantine question on the issue of the short-term rentals and the on the question of the quarantine, I think that I appreciate the idea that people are tested as an alternative. I do know that the incubation period is more than a couple of days, so that seems a little problematic. I would really want to understand what it is that people want to do. If the idea is, you know, we were concerned about becoming a refuge from places that were hotspots, and I'd want to be able to define where is a risky location, and the governor's office was not willing to do that today.
How about New York and New Jersey?
Well, the problem, Cliff, is New York and New Jersey are by all the news reports, but there may be, you know, so is Detroit, so is Mississippi, so might be Miami Beach. It gets a little granular as part of the problem. So is Gallup, New Mexico, and more to the point, on our side of that border is also a hotspot. And I don't really think the governor's order only addresses travel outside of Utah to hotspots. So I think this is a very complicated problem. What I guess my recommendation is not to just throw it open by allowing the current order to expire next week, but to allow me to begin an extensive, in-depth process. You know, in the last week, we also had to finish the semester and at my day job. So I've been working really hard, and I also am homeschooling a fair amount of the time so that my partner keeps her job. So, but I told Ken earlier in the day, and I would commit this to the town council, that I will work with Polly and the medical authorities and our advisors to come up with the best balanced policy that I can develop. And then it will be up to the town council to decide what to do at the June meeting. That's my recommendation, but it's really the council's decision. That was a little bit long, Cliff, if there's a specific question you want to ask, but you can see that, I mean, the thinking, it's a complicated problem.
Yeah, and you know, I appreciate your good faith on trying to find the best way to address those concerns, Mayor. I know we haven't gotten into discussion of the resolution yet, but I move that we do pass the resolution.
Is there a second? I'll second it. So what other discussion would the council like to have on this issue?
I want to applaud your statement, Mayor. I do think that perhaps we may have moved too swiftly, the governor and the mayor of Salt Lake County. And yet I appreciate Mayor Mendenhall's take that from a public health perspective, she's not certain what utility there is in keeping Salt Lake City at a red level when all the surrounding communities are at orange. And I think that we might be finding ourselves in a similar situation. And so looking at the relative risk of homeowners coming back to their properties as opposed to renting homes or condos, I think the former has a much lower risk than the latter. And so I would be more inclined to loosen those restrictions or let that restriction expire in May, but keep the restrictions around both rental properties and hotels.
We don't have a restriction that applies only to homeowners. That is a misunderstanding in that letter, and I want to be very, very clear about that. What we have is a restriction and a statement that it also applies to homeowners. That's different. And I am surprised that that came up again, given the earlier conversations that I've had about exactly that point. Now, what we can do is relax the need for people coming to Alta to quarantine and keep there are two separate issues. Do we allow nightly rentals? Do we require some kind of test or quarantine for people coming to stay in Alta? Those are two different issues. The reason for putting on the quarantine, and there are legal questions here too, and Polly, if you feel free to jump in on this. I don't think you can legally keep people from, well, There were people a month ago who were urging me to close the town entirely and not to allow parking and a lot of things like that. And, you know, I'm getting yelled at from every side on these questions, believe me. And I've been working with the ski area. I've been working with the county. If we get too far out of line, the county is going to squash us. And I think that Erin Mendenhall, for whom I have developed great respect over this period, understands that too. And I think that Jenny Wilson is under a lot of pressure from the governor's office. And I think the governor is under a lot of pressure from the legislators, especially those in southern Utah. And he's under a lot of pressure from the White House. So I think there are many there's just a lot going on with all of this on top of the medical uncertainty. But we did not single out homeowners for special restrictions. What we did was we put restrictions on people coming to stay in Alta, including the homeowners.
But
Right.
to Elise's point, oh, sorry.
Sheridan, go ahead, and then I'll come to you, Cliff.
Sorry, Cliff. To Elise's point, we have an inconsistency though in allowing people who live in Salt Lake City to come up and not quarantine, even though it could be argued that Salt Lake City is a high risk area given the numbers, but we're not extending that same sort of loosening of restrictions to, or help me understand that, please, Mayor.
Yeah, no, that's not quite right. If you come from out of Utah and spend the night in Alta, you are subject to the current, and I'm not trying to say it was perfectly written. And I think it can be improved. I mean, it's going to be hard to figure out just where to do that. But what we said was, if you come from out of Utah into Alta and spend the night, you're subject to this requirement. Now, the reason we had the boundary at Utah is if the boundary were Salt Lake County, we'd still have 1 million plus people who were not subject to that requirement. And if we made and I think we would get squashed by the governor. And if we made the boundary Alta, which was suggested to me, we would have had this problem that Elise is facing long ago with our police and dispatchers. And so that didn't make sense to me. Or some of our homeowners have a residence in Salt Lake City. So after quite a bit of discussion, we decided that it had to be Utah because that was consistent with the governor's order at the time. Still would be. So that's why it is. So it's not inconsistent. If you're coming from out of Utah to spend the night in Alta, this does pertain to you. Elise happens to be caught up in it.
Yeah, and I think what you just identified is what needs to be fixed, to have it track with the current guidance coming from the state, which says the quarantine should happen if a traveler is coming from a high risk area.
Yes, I would ask for the council's advice about how to define what that means, or simply to leave it to the traveler himself or herself.
Well, I think you start by reading the footnote in the directive, which will. I'm not saying that's the answer, Mayor. I'm saying you start by reading the footnote in the directive, which takes you to a map and other information about what are considered high-risk areas. It looks like Dr. Ken may also have some input on this.
The footnote takes you to the CDC website, and that only speaks to international travel. It doesn't currently speak to domestic locations as of yesterday. I do see that Mike Morey wants to enter this conversation. I don't actually see that Dr. Lbre is asking to be part of this conversation at this moment anyway. Mike.
Actually, I had sent you a note.
Oh, you withdrew the request.
Withdrawing that, but I would say that, you know, one of the very first and probably the most important thing in the decision you're going to make today is the continuation of order number 1, which is pretty critical in Chris Cawley's world and mine. We need that so that we can continue to operate under the incident command models that we are, and you know, hopefully get some relief when that day comes for you know, expenses and things like that. And I don't want to beleaguer the conversation that's going on right now, but as we look at order 4, I think it's pretty important that we don't let the genie out of the bottle. You know, we really need to look at consequences of any action we take or not. You know, and the mayor's point that some properties probably pose a greater risk to others if we relax the order, you know, particularly those that have shared doorways, shared elevators, service staff, you know, and I want to be real careful that we identify a best practice, you know, as we modify these decisions. Thank you.
If I could just,
yeah, please.
You know, again, this is a really complex issue, because you're going to have people saying that this imposes on their civil rights. I think the current situation should probably be relaxed with some caveats. Whether that's the testing. You know, the truth is the genie is out of the bottle. It's everywhere. And, you know, I think we may be offering ourselves a false sense of security by sequestering individuals who have come from some other place. Anyway,
I think that I would, and this had come up in the staff the other day, yesterday, I think it was, but also in my conversation with Ken earlier, taking a pretty close look at what Summit County is doing and Park City. I've spoken with Andy Bierman and I've spoken with Chris Robinson, the mayor of Park City and a council member of the Summit County Council. I would also be consulting with, obviously, the county, and although not directly related, because of my high regard for her judgment on these issues, I would be certainly talking to Mayor Mendenhall from Salt Lake City. Is there any other discussion?
Harris, this is Margaret.
Yeah.
I'd like to say that I really appreciate all that you've done on this, and I know that you've been getting a lot of heat, and only some of it I am aware of, I'm sure. And I think that the letters and the newsletters that you put on the website have been helpful in this regard. And that's why I suggested in the work session that maybe if you were to have, instead of the staff and you working on these things together and coming up with a proposal, if we were to have some community members involved, if that might help the community recognize the complexity, because your newsletter, appropriately, you try to make it condensed and insightful and short so that it'll be read, and yet obviously the issue is much more complex than that format leads to effectively. And I wonder if there might be additional buy-in, there might be more community support for us to work at maybe passing it now, but committing to convening a meeting in the next couple weeks and evaluating what additional information is available, because as you and Chris say, these things are changing daily. We don't know what the governor is going to do, the county, the city, the other counties, so on. So to work at maybe passing this now, but committing that before we get a month from now, we will look at it again and potentially evaluate or remove some of the more onerous restrictions if appropriate.
My concern is that we don't have very much time. In my conversation earlier with Ken, I committed to doing something within a week because that was about the soonest I thought I could get this done. I'm worried that, and it's not been, I mean, I should look in my email. I'm worried that at any hour, the governor vacates what we're doing. And I would be happy to hear what people have to say. Of course, I'm worried about the timing of how to do that right away. I think soliciting written comments, I think, would be pretty helpful. I gotta say, I mean, if you look at the news, this is so polarizing with some people on the civil rights side. And if you look at that letter I got from some of our townspeople, they're pretty angry. And on the other hand, I got just as many people telling me to close the town as I got hate mail from backcountry skiers telling me they were going to sue me if I did try to. So I'm just a little worried about a meeting becoming a battleground. Not to say that we can't have it, but that it has to be done quickly on top of it. And I need some ability to spend some time researching this and frankly, with my family.
Yeah, I think it's always great to get more information, and none of us are trying to close that off. But I also think we need to give the mayor some freedom of action to move expeditiously in good faith. We all know that. And then we'll be talking about this again next month.
I am sure that whatever we do will not be universally liked. There will be unhappy people across the board. In a way, that means we struck a balance.
Exactly.
Well, it would be possible to make a bad decision and make everybody unhappy also. So that isn't really the proof.
Fair enough. Fair enough. There are those who say I have, but I don't know that everybody's unhappy. I mean, we do see the people. What is interesting, of course, is that the people who are unhappy are the people who speak up most. You usually don't get, I have not in this job gotten a lot of thank you letters. But I have been told, I'll give you one example of people who have been very happy with the way we've done it. Thank you, Cliff. Is the Staleys at the Blackjack. Just to give you one example, they're in their 70s and they were pretty worried about driving back to their other residents in Oregon, which was harder hit than Utah. And they were worried about people in the Blackjack in the hallways. So they did say thanks. Okay, but I don't know if Polly, it looks like Chris, you want to say something.
I didn't mean to jump in front of Polly, but I do want to reiterate what Mike said about order number 1 and the question of whether we're still in a state of emergency or not. And you know, it doesn't feel that way anymore, but there are some, you know, structural advantages to maintaining that that initial action that we took. And I did double check with our Salt Lake County Unified Command Liaison about their emergency status. And several weeks ago, the county council, you know, updated their original declaration, and they will be in a state of emergency until like July 6th or something like that. So it would help us to be consistent, at least with that. So.
Okay. Should we, oh, Polly, I was going to just ask if you had, you didn't jump in front of her, Chris. I was just calling on her. If you have something to add, I don't.
No, I think that the discussion is right on, and I think the underlying motion and the underlying resolution is to extend the emergency order, which is the most important, and then the other orders, I think it's very good to get this input to make the decision on how you want to, what restrictions are appropriate for the town at this point.
Okay.
I want to say thank you, Mayor. As the weeks have gone on, I felt very safe with your decisions, and I applaud you for them. And so thank you. As a
Sheridan.
resident. And one thing that had come up that people had raised was the touchless delivery and the not allowing that, which I kind of question. Can you help explain that to me?
That letter contained several inaccuracies.
Okay.
And we did not,
okay.
It is not the case that people could not get food delivered to their door.
Okay.
What we did say is that you can't have a housekeeper come into your house until it's been empty. And
that makes sense.
And that was on the medical advice of the lifetime of the virus. And in fact, I think the Summit County order requires a 48-hour period between guests at the hotels that are reopened for that reason.
If somebody's having success getting food delivered to you in Alta, please call me. I want to find out about it.
My understanding is that Whole Foods will deliver to Alta.
We're picking up food from hand sewn, homegrown for all Alta residents. It was posted on the Alta Community Enrichment website. We're happy to do that.
Okay, good. I mean, I am so proud of us for taking care of each other, and I am so proud that our community, I think we've led on this issue, and we closed, the ski area closed quickly, the lodges closed quickly. We put into place no short-term, no overnight rentals. When we learned that we were getting people from hotspots, we put in these other orders. All of this was done quickly, under a sense of urgency, but as thoughtfully as we could do. And I think we have really done a good job in our small community. So, you know. All right, shall I call the question? Sheridan? I'm sorry.
I just was
you want
saying,
to say?
here.
Okay. Okay, so resolution 2020 R8. A resolution. I'll call the question on the vote for a resolution by the Alta Town Council consenting and extending emergency proclamation number 1 of 2020. Should this be a roll call vote, or it's obvious who's voting how under this format? So, Polly, should I call the roll or?
No, I think as long as Piper doesn't have any problem seeing who's
Oh,
voting for what,
okay.
there's no need for a roll call vote.
Okay. All right. So all those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 Okay, I got a thumbs up from Margaret. Okay, that looks like it's unanimous. Thank you for your confidence. Okay, the next item on our agenda. I hope this isn't a particularly controversial one, but it's a discussion and possible action regarding 2020 R9, a resolution regarding Central Wasatch Commission's interlocal agreement. That agreement has a couple of modifications in it, and what it now does is I think the main change is admitting Brighton as a member, and I think you've had this for a little while. Let's see, it's redlined as an amendment. Let me see.
My understanding from their summary was that it does two main things. One is to allow Brighton to be a member, and then the other thing was about ex officio members.
That's right. Because we wanted to be able to invite UDOT or UTA to be part of the board discussion, although as ex officio members, they wouldn't have a vote. So all the entities have been asked to approve this agreement.
I move that we adopt this resolution.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, thank you. That was Cliff making the motion, and Elise, I think that was seconding it. Is there a discussion on this? Okay, then I'll call the question. All those in favor of adopting resolution 2020 R9, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Is there an abstention? Or maybe I just didn't hear Margaret.
I sent you my thumbs up. Apparently you didn't see that.
No, I didn't see it. I had part of this screen. I was reading the resolution. So,
Okay.
so sorry about that. Okay, so none opposed. That's unanimous as well. Thank you. Okay, back to the agenda. Mayor's report, which is buried under some other stuff on my. Okay, this is not that long. I know I was just telling you I'm working all the time, which is true, but I don't actually have all that much to say. Okay, I know it's only been a month. I can't tell if sometimes I can't tell if something was last Tuesday or a year and a half ago these days. It's just very bizarre. I've been busy with the activities at the U, budgeting for 0 increases there, et cetera. We've been working on COVID-19 and the staff and I, and on the budget. I continue to attend the Salt Lake County Mayor's meetings, which are every week. And lately I've been attending the Economic Impact Working Group meetings that the county is also hosting. But John, I think I've handed that off to you if you're okay with that. I don't see his face. Yes, he's got a manual thumbs up. Okay. On the 13th, April 13th, I attended the CWC Finance Committee meeting. We dealt with the assumption that we're going to have to be bare bones. As Jay Torgerson said, there are no cost of living adjustments or raises being implemented at the UFA. I'm sorry, the CWC. I'm jumped ahead. Okay, so at the CWC, we dealt with the assumption that we're going to have to be really bare bones. We've cut the budget substantially. We're going to rely a little bit on reserves from the previous couple of years. Alta was asked to contribute 90% of our past rate, which would come to $13,500. I told them okay. From my point of view, that I was in the midst of the budget discussion and I would bring that to our town council. The main activity at the Central Wasatch Commission, and I think you will find this interesting if I can actually find the document. I may have to I don't know where I put it. I may have to refer you to their minutes, but there's a list of short-term projects and some money for us to do those short-term projects. And right now I'm afraid I'm not finding it. And the short-term projects includes things like fixing a bridge and a trail up to Dog Lake and a few other things like that. One of our letters from one of our constituents talked about a chipper opportunity. Jay, are you still here? I'm going to unmute him.
Yeah, I'm still here.
Yeah. The CWC was going to contribute something to that chipper day, and one of our town's members asked how that was going to work. Do you have something to say about that?
As far as how you organize a chipping day, or?
Yeah, how can we, in the past, we've had the ability to dispose of fallen trees with, I think, the UFA's help. Hasn't that been the case?
So we have a fuels crew that came up and did some work at Alta, I believe, last year, and we have chippers that we use. So that's part of the process of creating defensible space for structures. I'm not sure outside agencies what their recommendations are and how they utilize those, and if they require on the homeowners to be the labor for that. I'm not exactly sure. I don't think UFA has participated in this particular chipper day, are they?
I wasn't sure. This was a CWC initiative, and I wasn't sure who they were doing that through. So that's why I was asking. I'm sorry, I'm a little, this just came in, this letter, so I didn't really have a chance to research it. And I will find the CWC document and make sure that it gets part of this record. And I apologize for not having it on my fingertips at my desktop, but I don't know where it is. I think I must have closed that document and don't know where to open it from. Now I've kind of lost my own mayor's report. Okay. All right. On April 16th, the UFA Finance Committee meeting occurred, and I did succeed in having the buy-in. If you saw my newsletter, I did get the buy-in, as I described it in the newsletter, and to the town council at a previous meeting, that Alta's status will be charged the essentially the status quo amount plus inflation through the end of 2020. That comes to our budget shows 78,000 plus a little bit. and then the UFSA price would kick in starting in January, but our homeowners won't be billed for that until November of 2021. So, it takes a little bit of the sting out of it by the delay and by the half a year forgiveness. The committee agreed to do that, to forward that recommendation to the board. I am on the board of the UFA, not the UFSA, but on April 21st, I attended the UFSA board meeting and made the pitch to them, and they agreed with the idea. It was not part formally of their budget. That process is coming up. They have we have another finance committee meeting on the 7th to formalize the budget recommendation to the UFA board, who would be voting on a proposed budget on the 19th of May. So there's still a possibility that we don't get this benefit, but I think that all the principal players have said that they are on board. Okay. One temporary dog authorization during this last month to Paxton, Mater, York of Powder Ridge. They were already in town, had since mid-March. So this was in some sense a renewal so that they didn't have to try to go somewhere else during the COVID situation. So, and we had availability. So I decided that it was something to act on. Upcoming public meetings some of these I just mentioned. The CWC Budget Committee meeting is April 6th at 4 o'clock. Oh, we've changed those meetings till 5:30. So I think that's still in my calendar at 4. So the UFA Finance Committee meeting is on May 7th at 8 a.m. The UFA board meeting is on May 19th at 7:30 a.m. Jay, as far as I know, those are all still for quite some time. They're going to be electronic meetings. I think, as Chris said, into July. And then the CWC meets at 5:30 on June 1st. Okay, any comments or questions about that? Okay, the next issue, well, we would have to do it first. So the reason why the next issue on the agenda is a discussion about a sales tax increase of 0.1% is because that is built into the budget that is before you. The budget that is before you today would have to change if we decide not to adopt this 0.1% increase in our sales tax. So this is resolution 2020 R10. Let me make sure I read the title properly. A resolution by the Alta Town Council approving the imposition of an additional 0.1% of the resort community sales tax. Is there a motion to proceed with this?
So moved. That's Sheridan.
Okay, Sheridan. Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Okay, I think that was Margaret. Okay, so we have before us an amendment to a resolution increasing our taxes. I think Cliff made a number of good points. I wonder whether if a room in Alta costs $400 a night, this is a 40-cent per night increase if it is going to be noticed, whereas in aggregate, the money is on our budget standard is a meaningful amount. That would be my only I guess that would be my comment, but I thought Cliff made a number of good points. And I mean, we put this in here to, as I said, to get the budget to balance, close to balance without a big contribution from the general fund, because we thought we wanted to carry as much of that as we could. Also, I guess the thinking was that the property taxpayers are going to see an increase this year, and it seemed like maybe this would be supported. But I knew all along that Cliff was not going to speak in favor of this, and so I just wanted us to be able to have the discussion. Really, we do need to find alternative sources, and if the council is comfortable with $75,000 coming out of the general fund, then that is a ready solution to the question of the balance. And I'll say that this is provisional until we work out, more details in the budget between now and June. I think it would be much better to pass a budget today than not pass a provisional budget today. So that, and if this were to fail at the moment, and we were to decide that the budget should include this, I presume, Polly, we could bring, I don't know what our rules are, but about bringing a failed resolution back at a subsequent meeting, but I suppose we could do that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so this is neither a passage of a budget with or without this 0.1% assumption is not a final decision. And I suppose either passing this or not passing this is also not a final decision, because we could always make a different choice between now and the time that this would be imposed. This language assumes, that it begins on July 1st. So neither decision is necessarily binding on what's going to actually happen.
Yeah, you need to have a 3-month lag time in order to notify the tax commission. So if I think you need to have this decision by, oh gosh, I've worked this out like 5 times in my head. So it's actually October, it will be effective October 1st. If it says July 1st, that's an error.
If we tell them by July 1st, it will be effective October 1st.
Oh, I just misread it then, yeah. Okay, I saw the July 1st and jumped on that, okay.
And then just a little history that I found researching this is the state law has always allowed for up to 1.1% for this resort communities tax. And then there's an additional 0.5% or 0.5% that voters have to vote on. When I checked with the tax commission, he indicated that it used to be the resort community sales tax used to be 0.775%. And then in 1994, it was increased to 1%. Then back in 2004, there was a vote by the electorate to allow for the extra 0.5%. I don't know if it was an oversight. There was no discussion of the fact that this could have been increased to 1.1% when that 0.5% vote took place in 2004, or, it's just silent. The minutes are silent as to it. I just know that the history of 1% was imposed in 94. The law has been that you can do 1.1%, and your 0.5% was voted on in 2003 that was implemented in 2004.
Yeah, I agree with everything that Harris and Polly just said, and it's good to know that it's a 90-day lag time. That certainly makes sense. And if we were to find that we have to tighten our belts in all kinds of different ways and go back to the well for what's available, if that happened in October, then in that event, it would pick up revenue as soon as January.
I just, I haven't had a lot of time to think about this, to be honest, with everything that's been going on. So I was going to kind of just go with the direction of the council in general on this issue. I haven't had any time to look at numbers or anything, to be honest. I'm fine for the next item on the agenda of passing the tentative budget, but the sales tax part, I honestly haven't had a chance to really review it. So I'm kind of leaning towards whatever the council is, we all feel as a collective, I think.
I'll just point out, and Piper weigh in on this if I don't say this clearly or if I'm just wrong about it, but I think it would be an odd combination to pass the budget that we gave you and turn down this resolution, because the way that budget's written presumes a general fund contribution of $14,000 because it's presuming $63,000 coming from this new source.
Well, we could do that easily. We just subtract
Yes.
63,000 from one line and add 63,000 to another line.
Yeah, that's right. I just meant the budget as shown, but that's absolutely right. So Sheridan and Margaret, I guess my prior expectation is that the two of you would be the two who would be most in favor of this particular solution, but I'm not actually, given what Sheridan said earlier, that doesn't sound like I was projecting accurately. And Margaret, I don't recall if you've said something about this. Oh, okay. I'm going to interrupt myself, given what I just got a text from Jan. I forgot to mention that Jeff Selikoff got a 30-day dog license essentially renewed. He was also at Powder Ridge, and we decided that we didn't want him and his dog to have to go back to New York or Connecticut, I guess. So sorry to interrupt, but I'm obligated to tell you about the dog licenses.
I might chime in here about when you were talking about the projections of our fund balance in November 1st, before we start to get that property tax. If we decide at that point to put on the 0.1%, if we're really low, I guess at the end of November, I guess I worry about the balance getting low. When we get our general fund balance below 200,000, I start to panic, because that's only about, 4 to 5 payroll cycles that we have to make, not to mention, contract payments or whatever. So when I look at it, I forget now what you said, 570,000 would be our balance on November 1st. That would be lower, because that was assuming some of that would be reserved.
Well, I don't think that there was very much of that in there, at least in what I asked you to prepare. Was I think I told you that I wanted to present that number with an assumption of with essentially no sales between now and November 1st, which is,
we don't have the resort tax. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think our budget, given what I've heard from our ski area and from Mike Mon and Dave Fields, I think our projections are a little optimistic in this budget. But as Cliff said, we don't know that. And, we probably will know much better on July 1st than we know today. And we'll certainly know better on September 1st than we know. Well,
I guess.
I don't know actually if we'll know better on September 1st, because the expectation is of the resurgence of the virus is going to be in October is what I've.
And there's such varied projections. I mean, Cliff, I looked at that Utah cities and towns thing as well. It's a much less of a decrease. Is that right? Their projection? Yeah, much less, I think. And then if Mike's correct, then your people, when you have all those bookings, if they can't get as many runs in, or if there are restrictions on how the ski area operates, those people start to cancel, right? I mean, or decide it's not worth it to come out. I don't know. The projections are so varied that it's hard to know who you base your budget on.
Yeah. By the time we get to September, either we'll know more or we'll know that we don't know more.
Yep, you're right about that.
You're starting to sound like Donald Rumsfeld.
He was right about that.
He was. So
I'm
yeah,
also. Oh, sorry. I was
go
just
ahead,
saying that. Part of me, like, I don't want to pick on ACVB, but part of me is like, maybe we need to cut that even more to help in some way. I mean, I feel like there's some things that we can still drop. I don't want to, but we may have to do stuff like that. I mean, that's a big chunk of money for our budget. But I feel like there's still a couple places where we could trim a couple things still. Maybe if we don't pass the sales tax increase, we could trim some other stuff so we're not dipping into the general fund quite so much. Like I said, I hate to pick on ACVB, but it's like, it seems like there are some other ways we could reduce some things a little bit. I don't know.
I'll also throw in that Margaret and I had a conversation, and she dove pretty deep into it. There are $3,000 or $4,000 that could come off the expenditure side. So
besides ACVB,
I think it was a lot more than that, Piper.
Okay.
Wasn't I questioning 77,000?
I'm sorry, what was
I don't have those exchanges in front of me, Margaret, but I do know that everything you brought up was considered, and there are certain things that weren't viable decreases for reasons that I would expect make sense to you, but I don't remember all those details.
I didn't see details about them. I just asked about the reduction in terms of the feasibility studies. And I didn't see anything that said that was not necessarily something that we couldn't delay spending money on this year, and then saving that money that was put aside for those particular projects.
Yeah, but the issue with the 75,000 isn't really that applicable because it's a pass-through. It comes from impact fee and it goes out for impact fee. So it's not part of that operating cost. If you cut it off of the expenditure side, it would not be on the revenue side.
Right, we can't spend that any other way.
Yeah, so that was one of the clever ideas that the staff came up with, was to recognize that there are certain things that are like that are in the budget that we get the money and we spend the money, and can't substitute other expenses. So it wouldn't go back into the general fund, into the general unreserved fund, to be eligible to contribute to the imbalance in the budget. So the difference, if you take that out, I think there weren't very many additional savings. The ACVB is one, CWC is one that could go. we had talked about cutting what we pay the town council and the mayor. So there are a few additional places that some thousands of dollars could come off, but it's not particularly sizable. Maybe this is a moment where I should address Cliff's other concern, although we're not quite at the budget part of the agenda, but let me explain my thinking on the question of it's not that much difference in terms of total money to give people a raise in 2021 versus continue a planned disbursement of a bonus in 1920's budget. Because the money was about the same, and I do appreciate the idea that it does build into the future, but that actually, I think I want to speak against that. Because of that, I want to speak against doing the raises in 2021. For the bonuses, when I became mayor, for some time anyway, had been delivered to the staff at Christmas. For the first time this year, I said, that doesn't seem like the responsible choice to me because so much of our revenue is sales tax based, and we don't know what our sales tax is going to be for the fiscal year in December.
Not to mention the separation of church and state.
Winter holidays, excuse me.
Yes, year end.
Their calendar year end. But I did actually propose that it all get delivered at the end of the fiscal year. And the staff prevailed on me to split it in half because the habit has been to expect money in the December paychecks that go toward, shall I say, Cliff, traditional additional expenditures that families incur in the month of December. And so I decided to split it in half. I felt part of the reason why I said to go ahead with that was a sense of personal obligation to the staff, because what I said was, if our sales tax revenue in 1920 supports the disbursement, I would support the disbursement. And I feel like that condition has been met. So personally, I don't want to renege on that understanding with the staff. But in addition to that, the staff have been heroic in how they've adjusted to a situation that occurred in March and April of the current fiscal year. So it feels correct to me that they're deserving of the money now. And money in a lump sum, psychologically, the psychological research shows is valued more. It doesn't have more monetary value, it has more utility than money divided into 24 smaller packets across the year. So those were the reasons I thought, and we can afford it out of the 1920 budget. So those were all the reasons why I intended to continue to disperse the bonus. On the other hand, no government entity in Salt Lake Valley, and maybe even in Utah, but I don't know that, and the UFA, of which we're a member, and my own experience at the University of Utah, and I just got my final budget today as a department chair. My faculty know that they're not getting raises, but now I'm going to actually have to tell them that for sure. I felt like following suit made sense, and the staff agreed with me on that question. And then finally, as a board member of the UFA, I told the UFA, look, along with the other municipalities, we are not giving raises. The UFA, who's collecting money from our taxpayers, must not give raises. And so there's a number of personal reasons of keeping a promise to the staff and having said something accurately to my colleagues on the board of the UFA that matter to me, but there are also matters of the psychology of finances, and going and not wanting to be singled out as that town up there that gave everybody raises after the conversations we had with the county about how much money we were spending and how much money we were taking in. So that's my pitch for why it looks the way it looks.
Well, there's so many compromises that go into this budget, and I get that.
Yeah, I just hadn't shared my thinking about that until I didn't. Now I did.
Yeah, and that's all reasonable.
So I guess we should call the question on the tax increase. Is there any further discussion? Okay, seeing none. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Opposed? Say no. No. Okay, is there anybody abstaining? Okay.
I'm going to abstain.
Okay. Margaret, you gave me a thumbs up, but I'm assuming that means a no. Because it was the question of, do people say no, and you gave me a thumbs up.
I'm sorry, I thought your question was whether or not we were voting for the increase in taxes. Was that not the question?
So you were saying aye.
Yes.
Okay. So
was I not supposed to?
No, that's good. Okay. So Piper, we have one aye, 2 nay, and 2 abstentions. So the resolution does not pass.
Okay.
Okay. Discussion and possible action to review, consider, and adopt tentative fiscal year 2020-21 budget is the remaining item on our action item other than new business. So what I would propose we do is, as Cliff suggested, we add, let me just add this up. Take a look at line number 1039-200, which reads $14,151. And we add, Piper, what's the right number? 63,000?
Yes.
Even?
I have to
Close enough for today, probably, right?
Yes.
Okay. So that line would become 77,151. And the line for sales and use taxes would go down to 887. Oh no, it's at 87,504 minus 63,000.
824.
$824,504. So is there?
I was going to say, I move that we pass the tentative budget with those changes.
Okay, thank you. Is there? That was just what I was going to ask, if there was a motion. Anybody second that?
I'll second.
Okay, Sheridan, thank you. Okay, further discussion for the moment, and with, I'm sure, more conversation to occur.
So did I miss something? Based on the previous conversation, Mayor, are you saying that the staff will not be receiving the bonuses that were discussed around the holiday season?
No, the motion on the table doesn't address that question, and the motion that's on the table to pass this provisional budget this provisional budget does not include any upward movement in staff compensation
For the next fiscal year, but not for the previous fiscal year.
for from July 2020 through June 21.
Got it.
That's right.
Oops.
Okay. Sounds like I can call this question. All those in favor of passing the budget as proposed and as amended as what's the language, Polly? A provisional budget?
Tentative.
Tentative budget, thank you. For the 2020-2021 budget year, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Elise, you said yes. Margaret, I didn't see a thumbs up and I was looking for it. Okay.
I'm sorry. I was going to abstain actually because I didn't understand the stuff that you just went through. So I thought I would get clarification later. Thank you.
Okay. Do you want me to take a minute and run through it?
Well, I want to belabor everybody else. So maybe I'll just see if I can get it in writing from you or Piper a bit later. Thank you.
Okay. We'll certainly forward a we'll email you a new PDF with the exact right number. Yep. Okay. I guess we should add a little caveat that the 63,000, it was a round number and is close, but it's probably not perfect. So the amount that would be in those two lines may be slightly different, a couple of decimal places over.
And do you want me to change the budget with the actual number? But I think I know it's 63. I just don't know the hundreds. So
right, yeah, we should put the number that we believe it to be. Now, of course, this is all a little bit tentative because it's based on some assumptions about what the sales tax is going to be. So, right. But we ought to carry through with our thinking and be consistent with it. Otherwise, it makes it that much harder to explain.
Okay.
All right. Thank you. Wow, we got a lot done. It's 6:57. We are 2 minutes away from our schedule. So yay. New business.
I just had a quick question for Jen. Jen, have you had any clarification with regard to vetting the people who pulled dog tags and whether or not they actually qualified for Class A status?
Yes, I have. I finally got some response from the woman I was working with at the county, and everybody that I was questioning was a registered voter. So I actually, before the council meeting today, emailed them all that they had a license and have 6 months to fill that. And then I did let all the people know that did not get a license, that as well.
So did it change any of the top six that were pulled, or are they all registered voters? Okay, thank you.
One person, because it was a husband and wife that both submitted, one person just said, now that you've pulled my significant other, you can take my name out of it and, adjust the list that way. But that was the only change that happened in the order of how people were drawn.
So number 7 did get one
right.
of the
7 was really number 6. That's how it worked.
Right.
Out.
All right. Well, I'll call for a motion to adjourn then, and wish everybody well and stay safe and don't go hog wild going from red to orange because it's still out there.
Motion to adjourn?
I haven't heard one yet.
So moved.
Okay.
Second.
Okay. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Okay. I see a thumbs up from Margaret. Thank you. Right on time. Great. Appreciate it. Okay.
Thank you very much. Great meeting.
Bye-bye.
Stay well.
Yeah, you too.
Yes, definitely.
Take care.